Hello, I'm Liz Knapp, and I volunteer here at the History Center. I'm Genealogy Library Director. And the program today is brought to you from the Monroe County History Center. We're talking about growing up in Bloomington during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Our guests today are Dot Moore Spohr.
Sounds like you're stuttering.
The same tone anyway. And Jane Worley Burris and Bill Knapp. And they all graduated from high school here in Bloomington, but not all at the same school. So hello to all of you. And Jane, why don't you start off by telling us what you remember about coming to this building as a child? Do you remember?
I came to this building frequently because I'm a great reader. And I should have brought some pictures that I had taken along the way, because there was a little place where you could get your pictures taken, a strip, for a dime. And I had one that's a jewel. But I came at least once or twice a week to get library books. I still love to read.
What about you?
I
Did you
have
come to the library?
Oh yes, came to the library. I remember my first word that I remembered that had 2 syllables was the word garden. And I was 5 years old. And I read when I was 5 years old. And Mother would bring me to the library here. And on my library card, which I was very, very proud of, you could take out 10 books and you could keep them 2 weeks. And I'd sit in the back seat on the way home and read them. And so then we had to come right back and bring the books back and get some more books. But I can really enjoy memories of this library and coming here to read and take out books.
Hey, Bill, did you use the library?
Oh yeah, I remember coming here quite often, particularly when I was in elementary school. Being fairly competitive, they had a reading program and a reading contest in the summer, and 3 years in a row I won that. Now, I made sure I didn't get very thick books to read, but I still won the contest.
Okay, good. Some of the other things we could talk about are some of your chores or jobs that you had when you were a child, or something like that. Bill, do you want to
start? As the only
start?
girl in the family, I got a lot of jobs. I had 4 older brothers, and I was the only girl. So any household chores that a girl could do, I did.
I bet.
Back in those days, I know it's hard for anyone to think about this. Some of these people might, but my mother washed on Mondays and she ironed on Tuesdays. And no wonder she had horrible varicose veins, because back then the boys all wore pants that had to be ironed and shirts that had to be ironed. My dad wore shirts to work, white shirts to work. And she would stand and iron all day on Tuesday. So I got all the flat work. And at that time we had tablecloths, and the tablecloths had to be, and the handkerchiefs had to be ironed, and the pillowcases had. So I got in on that job, and I also got in on cleaning. And where we lived on 2nd Street, my grandmother Worley had built that house, and there was a long sleeping porch in the back. And the boys slept in the sleeping porch. And they threw their dirty socks and their dirty clothes and their smelly shoes under the beds, and I had to clean that every Saturday morning, one of my hated chores.
Oh dear.
But those are just some of the things that you did what had to be done. Mm-hmm. She didn't let me in the kitchen. I wish she'd done that a little more. I would have been better prepared for marriage. But I did do a lot of stuff around the house. And the other thing I hated, we had a fireplace in that house on 2nd Street. Every Saturday morning, my job was to go down and empty the ashes out of the pit in the basement and clean out the ashes in the fireplace. And I swore I would never have a fireplace, and I never want one. I didn't want to clean that thing. And I said when we bought our house, I don't want the steps that have to go up and down. I don't want a two-story house. I don't want a fireplace, and I don't want a basement, and I don't have any of them.
You were very specific.
And I'm living in the same house we bought in 1950s.
Dot, did you have siblings that you had to take care of?
I had no
like that?
siblings. My mother and I came back after her divorce from my dad to Bloomington from Indianapolis when I was 2 years old. And we moved over to well, at that time we lived in the old family home on East 2nd Street across from the IGA, and the house is still there. It was built when my mother was a little girl. And so when I was 3, we built our house at the corner of East 1st and Hawthorne. And I lived there, and I lived with my great uncle, Harry Feltus, who never did marry, and my grandmother, his sister, and my mother. And they all 3 worked at the newspaper. We had the Star Courier newspaper, and they all 3 worked. We all 3 did all the housework. We just kind of pitched in, and everybody made their own bed, and we sent the shirts to home laundry, and we did the rest at home. And they came home on a piece of cardboard, and the rest we hung out on the lawn. And I just feel like it was it was a great time. I know one chore we all had, because they were all working all the time. And I was really on my own as to getting to school and back. And I'd skate to school down to VHS in 7th grade and on up. And then I'd carry my skates home, and that was all back uphill. And I'd carry them home. And I got 5 cents a week allowance, and I could either get a Coke at Lyons Drugstore or I could ride the bus. So I had to make my choice. But one chore we all had, if we heard the fire engine in the middle of the night, we got out of bed as quick as we could get out of bed, get our clothes on, and go to the fire, because we wanted to get the bulletin in our newspaper window before the HT.
Well, at that time, it was just telephone, wasn't it?
Harold telephone,
Yeah.
Yeah. Bill, how about you? Did you have chores as a
Well,
child?
I had the usual male chores. The one I remember the most is mowing the lawn and doing the outside lawn work. That, of course, was prior to the days of power lawnmowers. And sometimes in thick grass, it was all you could do to muster up all the power you had to push that darn lawnmower through that grass. But those were chores that, as you well know, I enjoy to this day, being outside in the lawn working. That's the only, I had to do the usual dishwashing when it was my turn and things like that, but nothing more than the usual kid.
Okay. And how about riding bikes or learning to drive? Do you have something you want to tell us about one of those?
Well, I've got scars to prove it. I don't know when it was. I think I was around 10. I had always wanted a bicycle. And I don't know how Mom and Dad pulled it together, but they got me a beautiful yellow Swin bike. And I was all over the place on that bicycle. And I remember Gwendolyn Purcell. They lived on Madison, where that apartment building is now. And I would ride up Madison to Gwen's house to play or do whatever. And I remember it was there are a lot of trees along there. Also a lot of birds in those trees. Remember one particular one, right on top of my head going up that street. And the other occasion on that was my cousin Mackie Worley. We had moved by that time up to Maple Street, and that hill going between 3rd and 4th is very stiff, and we lived very steep hill, and we lived kind of in the middle of the hill. But she was up there, and we decided we'd go down the hill on the bicycle, and I was going to turn and take her home, go up 4th Street and around. Well, she was pretty hefty. And she was on the seat and I was standing up. And we got down to the corner of 4th and I started to turn the corner and somebody had spilled a load of gravel. And I hit that gravel and I was all over scrapes. Then I got back on the bike and took her home, and then I came home. But I still have a couple of places on my wrist that were scraped back then. You don't forget things like that.
Don, how about you?
Yeah.
Well, I went every place on my roller skates, and they're still in pretty good shape. They're in this glass case out here in the hall. Those are my roller skates. But I thought you could skate any place in Bloomington. And I did not have a bike for 2 reasons. I don't think they had the money at the time for anything what they would have called extra. And I think Mother probably was afraid I'd get hurt or something too. But anyway, when I needed a bicycle for something special, or we'd go for a special ride, my friend that lived right by me, Mary Lou Beard, her dad was owner, and his and her mother's parents of Stout's Drugstore. And Mary Lou had everything, and we kid about it today, she knows it. And they had bicycles and they had everything, and she would always loan me a bicycle when we wanted to go somewhere, because her sister had one. And so we'd go on that. We went to places on our sleds too, believe it or not.
Oh, you had enough snow anyway.
Yeah.
Remember, you always had to have your roller skate key.
Yeah.
And you had to wear leather soles because the kids nowadays couldn't possibly use those things.
I didn't have anything but leather sole shoes
Well, you had to
anyway.
have leather soled shoes, and even if you outgrew them, you kept them because your skates fit on them.
Yeah. I still
You
got my
If
key.
you lost that roller skate key, you were in trouble. You
Mine's
couldn't
still out
skate.
there in the glass case. And we'd put it on a shoelace and hang it around her neck.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, I know you rode your bicycle around Bloomington. Can you tell us something about it?
Yeah, we lived at the corner of North Woodlawn and East 14th Streets. And Bloomington at that time, I'm talking about the mid-40s into the late 40s, was just the ideal town. The population was somewhere around 18 to 20,000. The student enrollment, I believe, I didn't research these numbers, but I believe toward the end of the 1940s was just under 10,000. And the students in those days did not have cars. They were poor like the rest of us. And we could get on our bikes and ride across town, down across the downtown square. I remember one day in particular, talking about bike riding, my grandfather was active in the Republican Party, and he was a two-term county commissioner. And in those days, unlike it is now, the Republican Party pretty much controlled the politics in the city and in the county. However, Bloomington had elected a very fine young Democratic mayor by the name of Tom Lemon, who was very progressive and was a good mayor, as I recall. And he had talked the city council into putting parking meters in the downtown area. And they placed them around the square, and they placed them on the county portion of the square, the county-owned portion of the square. And the commissioners started wanting their share of the proceeds from the parking meters around the square. And this little battle went on for a few months, and one afternoon I got a call. My grandfather said, "Billy," he said, "get on your bike and ride downtown. There's going to be something interesting taking place." So I got on my bike, and when I got downtown, the county was down there. On the east side of the square, on the county property, they were cutting off the parking meters and just very neatly putting them up on the little bank there at the courthouse. And this was drawing quite a crowd, and finally Mr. Lemon found out about it. He charged up the hill from City Hall, which is now the Waldron Arts Center. And finally, the police came, and they couldn't do anything, and then finally they got a court injunction to stop it. And to this day, I don't remember who got the proceeds from those parking meters, but at least they put up a battle together.
When you spoke about Tom Lemon, his father built a little house that was already there right across the street from where I now live. That was Tom Lemon's dad's house, that little white house that was there. I remember Tom Lemon. I remember how Republican this county was too, because my Uncle Chuck was Monroe County Democratic chairman for what, 20 years, I don't know, a long time. So when they needed help, I'd copied poll books. Mom and Dad both worked. So he called me at one election and asked me if I would challenge voters. I was every bit of 16. and I got to sit down there and challenge voters with a very staunch Republican. I wish I could remember her name, who lived in the neighborhood. And I challenged some.
Yeah,
I did my job. I want you to know I made $2. That bought me a pair of shoes.
But you know, the nice thing about local politics back then, as I recall, was that regardless of the party, usually the electors were smart enough to always elect the best person for the job, despite their party affiliation. So we had very good government in both the city and the county.
Yeah.
Do you remember when they called the little fence or thing around the square house as the hitch rack?
No,
Well, that was
the
horses.
hitch rack was
They hitched the horses to it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Little bit
Oh,
before
I
us.
remember when that was
Do you?
there. Yeah, it seemed to me that it was over on the
was just
It
on
seemed
one
to me it
side?
was over on the,
West?
it seemed to me it was over on the corner of College.
Bill, do you remember?
Yes, it was on the northwest corner.
Yeah, yeah.
On the west side. Yeah,
It's just kind of.
Have
in the
any
back of my
stories
mind.
to tell about
Mhm.
going up to the hit track on the
Oh, over at Evans,
weekend? or-
Evans, yes. Well, that was absolutely a must to go over the hit track to dance.
Oh, yes,
on
over
weekends.
towards Ellis.
Yeah, yeah. That's where we're gonna learn to jitterbug.
Me too.
What about Christmas and holidays? What did you do? In your
Well, we were all
childhood
so
or
poor, they didn't make
teenage?
that much difference. Oh,
I got
remember.
one present.
You know, I don't think we really felt like we were doing without. Of course, both of us grew up during the Depression years. Nobody had anything.
Mhm.
We didn't know we were poor because everybody was
We
poor.
were fine.
You know, nobody, Dad lost all of his property, he lost his business, he lost his job, and we just went by, you know, whatever we could bring in. And I do remember this one Christmas, however, I don't know that it affected me adversely. My Christmas that year, my mother had made me a blouse. And my Christmas present was a set of jacks with a little ball.
Oh, yes.
That was my Christmas present. Now, I remember that, and I don't remember being disappointed.
Right.
You know, I was happy.
Did you have
I was
a nice special
taken
dinner
care of.
or
It was
anything?
important.
Do you have a special dinner for holidays or for Christmas?
No,
Have family come or
yeah,
something?
well, we had so much family, you know, with all the boys there. And when Dick and Harold were married, that brought in them, but they all lived in the neighborhood. So,
So
in
you
fact,
saw them
I
every
learned,
day?
I learned to play
almost?
bridge with my two sisters-in-law and my mother. And I learned to play before contract bridge was even thought about. It was auction bridge, and each person played for themselves. So I've played bridge. They'd need a fourth to play on Sunday afternoons. I started playing bridge when I was 11 or 12 years old.
Well, Doc, tell us
Oh,
about your holidays.
Oh, they were all wonderful because Mother was a believer in holidays. And she would, I'll just go through a few of them real fast, but she would go down to our newspaper office and bring home a great big piece of, we could always get paper, for, you know, color and draw and play school on because they had stuff left. And she'd bring home pieces, nice big pieces of cardboard. And we'd invite all the little neighbor kids in, and each one got one for Easter to make a big poster. And she bought some cotton, and we'd put that on the rabbit, and then we'd paint the rabbit's feet and everything, and put Happy Easter on it. I remember that real clear. I also remember our neighbors, the Kinseys. They were a wonderful family, and their kids were my close friends, and one of them still is. And they had 3 kids, and they would hide 3 eggs here and 3 of something here and 3 here. And the kids were to go, their kids were to go around and take one, and but not let them see them where they found it, you know, and then go ahead till they got their basket full. And I remember they would have an Easter egg hunt for the neighborhood. And I remember that clearly. And I remember our Valentine Day at school at Elm Heights. We had a big box, great big old cardboard box, and I guess the teacher had probably covered it with pretty paper and everything. And for weeks ahead of time, we'd bring Valentines for people and drop them in the box. Then on Valentine Day, we'd have a party. One of the mothers would bring cookies, and they'd open up the Valentine box, and people would get to pass them out, you know. And I always felt sorry for the kids that didn't get very many Valentines. And there was one boy that had the same name as the one that I kind of liked at the time. And he got the Valentine instead of my boyfriend's name. And it had the same name on, and I didn't say anything. I thought, okay, he needed it. But I don't know where he is now. But it didn't really matter. But it was just a memory. And then on May Day, 2 of our neighbors had maypoles, and so did Elm Heights. And they'd have a PTA on May Day every year with a potluck out in the yard. That's Harmony School now. Anyway, they had a big pole, and the kids, if you haven't ever gone on a maypole, you haven't lived. But you have to weave in and out all the way around, you know. And we did that on May Day. They had big long ribbons from a pole attached, and we'd all go around the maypole. And then another one of our neighbors had one of those. And 4th of July was great, except the time I went down to my friend's house, the Dobsons. Nancy ended up marrying a Grossman, and Danny ended up their kid, the I-man. Anyway, Nancy and I were playing in the basement, and we always played in basements because people had new houses there and they had room. And so their mama just washed, and she'd dumped the wash water out and supposed to go down a little drain there, and most of it did, but I slipped and fell and knocked me out. And I had to go to the doctor on 4th of July. Seemed like it was a disaster area for me on the 4th. But holidays were special. Christmas was special. I remember one Christmas I got up, and I always had hung up my sock, and I'd get fruit in it, or, you know, maybe a piece of candy or two, or some little trinket or something. And being the only child in the house with 3 adults, they kind of did things for me. But I remember getting up that Christmas, and my mother said, now before you look at your sock, or before you open anything, I have 2 boxes ready, and we're going over on, I can't tell you the street now. I shouldn't anyway. But she said they don't have any Christmas, and they don't have anything. And those little kids have no Christmas tree. And she says, we've got one cut for them, and we're going over there, and you're going to see what it's like to give somebody that doesn't have anything. And we took that on Christmas, and then we came back and had our Christmas.
That's
I can
very
tell you
nice.
something about Christmas that doesn't relate to anything like that, and something about May Day.
Mhm.
But Christmas, when we lived up on West 7th Street before we moved down on 2nd, I was about 4 or 5 years old, and boy, Christmas then was when you're really little. And that was before the Depression really got started. And we lived next door to a couple on the corner, and he had a set of sleigh bells. And he and Dad got together, and they'd sent me upstairs to bed. And here they went outside bringing those. Well, I was sure Santa Claus had come.
Yes.
So they rang those. I can remember that distinctly. And I wouldn't want to get out of bed because there wasn't anybody else upstairs, and I was sure there was something under that bed. And then on May Day, the one I remember is at O'Hunter School. I think I was in the 4th grade because I was in Miss April's class at that time. And Catherine, I think her last name now, well, I played with her all the time. Anyway, she was sitting right behind me. And she said, Miss April, Jane's got something on her neck. I had broken out with a rash on the back of my neck. I actually had, not measles.
Chickenpox?
Yeah. It wasn't anything serious, but we were having our maypole dance the next day, and I had to stay home. I couldn't be in the maypole dance. That really disappointed me.
Yes. Well, Bill, can you tell us something about your holidays or Christmas?
Oh, we observe the traditional Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays with family gatherings at Grandpa and Grandma's. Both of them. Just like when we were first married. We had to hit them all.
Oh, yeah, that's bad. Well, we had Grandpa and Grandma East, and the whole family gathered there from time to time. And Grandma always had a fir tree. You know what fir trees do?
Yes, I do.
All they do is shed. And I still got her 2 candles that you can't find bulbs for. They still work. I want to give them to a museum because they're ancient.
I'm sure they'd be happy to accept them.
Well, I keep them. I don't know why.
Yes.
The Smaltzes used to take us riding in their sleigh. They had a sleigh, the Smaltz kids, Jim, Dick, and Mary Susan, and the owners of the Big Bear upstairs. They had Smaltz's store, and those guys were a little bit older than me, but they were always awful nice to me. And we got to ride in the sleigh, and take rides.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Oh, yeah.
What about sports or games or things? I know you probably didn't all play sports or...
I've got a broken finger. They're bruised.
Yeah, dislocated knee and stuff.
I swam a lot.
Foot pony.
Yeah, I've
Did
always
you?
been a great swimmer.
Oh.
My brother, Jim, who was next to me, now he didn't have to do this, But he just loved his little sister, and he took me every place he went. And I cannot remember when I did not know how to swim. But he took me to the 3rd Street pool swimming when the pool, the house for changing clothes was down on the corner of 3rd, where that building is now, and you walked up a boardwalk all the way up to the swimming pool. And that swimming pool, the stuff in that would just shred the bottoms of your feet. But you could rent a bathing suit for a nickel. And it cost a nickel to get in. But he took me swimming, and I cannot remember when I could not swim. I just took off the water. And then I played with the boys. I didn't have any little girls to play
That's
dollies
what happens
with.
to-
I didn't care about dolls one whit. I played with the boys, and I got a finger right there. My cousin Maxine was about as unathletic as you could get. And we used to play at her house, which was just about a half a block up the street. And it was on a hill, and I was the catcher. And Maxine was batting. I don't know who was pitching, but instead of bringing the bat around this way, she goes, what? Like this, and it hit me right on the finger. It really did break my finger. I told you that she was very feminine. Can you imagine bringing a bat over?
Did you play any sports?
Oh,
or
we played,
games
yes.
that you want to
Our,
tell us?
our ball diamond was, oh yeah, we played ball all the time. We played out every night under the street light till somebody's mother would whistle, and then we'd all go home. Now you can't even let a little kid out in the dark. I mean, it was wonderful. We played
We had
out.
a lot of games that we played.
Oh, yeah.
Really.
And
King of the Hill.
our ball playing lot was on the corner of, right up from Elm Heights School on Hawthorne and Hunter, where Vondersmith's ended up building, and where, what's my?
Baxter.
Yeah, Beth Baxter, my nurse practitioner, lives now. She married one of the Chumleys who were on the other corner. And that was our ball diamond, because Libels lived next door, and their kids played out with us. And we had a wonderful bunch of kids that played out, our whole crowd. But land, you could let kids out and let them out in the dark, we'd walk
But if we
home.
really wanted to play ball, we could go down the street on 2nd Street.
Yeah, you had a
Because,
ball diamond.
Well, we had a tennis court down there.
Yeah.
Well, where the old school was, they had the old gymnasium, and next to that was the tennis court. And we could go down there and play baseball or anything we wanted, anytime we wanted to. It was just 2 blocks from where we lived.
All those fun games that you made up yourself.
Oh, gosh,
Bill,
yeah. Well,
what-
now those we didn't play down there. We played up the hill where that beautiful new park was was what we called, oh, I wish I could think, it was terrible. It was an abandoned quarry and ironweeds. It was ironweeds, and we played in the ironweeds a lot. It was a good place to hide, because I did have a lot of ironweeds and old rocks and stuff. Of course, you could burn yourself too, because it was easy to fall down in it. But we played wherever there was an available spot.
Right.
We played marbles a lot too.
Oh, yeah. And jacks,
Jump rope.
yeah.
But you know, it was so nice that kids could be so free to get outside day and night. And we'd play out till the rain would start, and then we'd all go home. But now I wouldn't let a kid walk 2 blocks away to play a ball game in the dark. A little kid, maybe 8 years old, little girl by herself.
Well, you know, when my grandchildren came down from Fort Wayne, when they were little, it was still pretty safe in the east end of town. And Chad he was always wanting to go someplace. So we had a bicycle for him. We kept an old bike for him. And he'd take off and go all over the place on that bicycle. And he was only 8 or 9 years old, and I didn't feel leery about it. See, at my age now,
Yeah.
even, that long ago, Chad is now 36. See, even 25, 30 years ago, you felt safe.
Oh, yeah.
Really.
And can you believe that we rented ponies from
Oh,
Milton
sure.
Robertson? And he lived on the corner of Atwater and Hawthorne. And we could rent them for 50 cents a day or a quarter for a half a day.
Oh.
And can you believe we rode those down the middle of East 3rd Street?
Sure.
All the way down 3rd Street? Now, we don't even take a car over that way if we can help it. We go down the back way, you know. But imagine riding ponies down the middle of the road.
Well, Bill, tell us about some of the sports or games that you played.
Well, we played the usual neighborhood games like Dot and Jane were talking about. Being a boy, we were more interested in organized games. That was before the Little League baseball program. But Marvin Grove, who was the longtime
He was best man at our wedding.
baseball coach at Bloomington High School, conducted a summer program, program for the kids. And it was held at the old Jordan Field. Now, the old Jordan Field was the IU baseball field that was located where now the parking lot just east of the Union Building is located. That big, large area, and there was a baseball field. And Marvin taught us all the basic fundamentals that we needed to know to play the game. And although I went to university school, which I had the pleasure of doing from the 4th grade through my senior year, I got to play on his American Legion team as a young man. Another thing about Jordan Field, and of course we played all the other sports that the kids played at the time. But another thing about Jordan Field that I remember during the war years, the Cincinnati Reds did their spring training there, and that was a thrill for a kid to be able to walk a few blocks and sit there and watch these Major League Baseball players play, and they play exhibition games there, and it was really a lot of fun. I saw Ted Kluszewski one time. Ted Kluszewski was an Indiana University athlete who later played for Cincinnati. At the field house located on East 7th Street, just this side of the auditorium, Ted Kluszewski hit a home run that bounced off the top of that field house. And I wouldn't believe it, but I was there and I saw it. Well, I'll get off the subject.
No, I love that. Because, Marvin Grove was best man at our wedding. Don was a pitcher, and he had pitched American Legion ball, and a very, very good pitcher. In fact, he had a tryout with the old St. Louis Browns when he was still in high school. And Marvin Grove was his catcher. And they were very, very good friends. So when you talked about him, I remember him so well.
Yeah, he was a good person.
He was a wonderful person, really.
Yeah.
So was my husband.
Well,
Yes, he was.
I know that.
I'll vouch for that too. I can remember too, I thought it was kind of interesting to talk about Jordan Field.
Yeah.
I guess you all remember when it became where the cows and the pigs went, when the Monroe County Fair moved to the field house.
Yeah.
And that's where we had all the animals set up down there. So that area right there has really done a lot of service.
Yeah.
Now you can hardly get in or out of it.
Yeah, the infield was always, or the outfield was always good and green after the county fair had been.
After the fair.
And good fertilizer.
Well, you talked about the fair and animals and things. What about the circus that was here
Oh,
a lot
gosh,
of times?
yes.
Do you have memories of
Yes.
the circus?
Yeah.
It walked down the parade. I mean, the circus was on the Allen Showgrounds,
Yeah.
and that was down off of East First Street,
Yeah.
right kind of behind the church down there, back on Allen Street. They had the circuses inside. But when they landed into Bloomington on the IC train, they would have a parade. I guess they got off at the IC.
Near the depot, wasn't it?
Well, this bunch came down from.
They come down from the north.
Mhm. And anyway, they had a parade past our house. I remember laying in bed looking out the window like this, at the animals, and all the parade went by, the elephants and everything, and that would be before the circus.
Jane, do you have other memories of
Of this-
animals or circus or?
No, we always had dogs.
Jane, that's not.
Well, I had to take care of them.
Yeah.
I know that Aunt Mabel used to raise Boston bulls, the little sweet little Boston bulls, and every one of them had got distemper. Every one she had, I think, we got distemper, and I have this distempered coats on, and you couldn't save them.
Mm.
You know, I said if I got a dog, it was going to be a plain old dog.
Bill, how about you? Do you have?
Well, I just remember the circus coming to town. I don't remember the parades, but we always went to the circus, and I frankly didn't get much out of it. I just didn't care for the circus.
I'm with you.
Unlike, I got to say this for Liz's benefit, because she was a big circus fan because of her grandfather Hal, who wanted to run off and join the circus when he was a kid, and had this wonderful miniature circus.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That I remember.
That was fun for the grandkids and the great-grandchildren and all the family and the community to enjoy.
What about some of the little neighborhood stores that we used to
Yeah,
go
oh,
to?
gosh, yes.
Grocery,
The wigwam.
buy candy.
The wigwam, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
tell us about some of the stores that you remember.
We had one at the corner of Woodlawn and Atwater, and it was all different things. It was Bartlett's at one time, it was Peterson and Williams at one time, and Weaver's when we got married and moved over onto Atwater. It was there. And I used to walk to the store from our house, and for 10 cents you could always get a loaf of bread. I'd usually nibble on the hill on the way home.
yeah, I could run across our backyard to the grocery store. Said I could, when we lived on 2nd Street, I could cut across our backyard and go to the grocery store. And next to that was the wigwam, which was there for years and years. And they always had tip boards. You could pull a tip off for a nickel.
Kids could do that.
Yeah, and they let me do that, and you know what I won? A pack of cigarettes.
I don't remember you ever using them.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, and the thing I remember downtown, there were several candy stores, but I remember Tommy Kanakis.
Mhm.
Well, the Kanakis had a candy store, a confectionery, near the Harris Grand Theater on North Walnut. And then down near the Indiana was the Candy Kitchen.
Mhm.
So you had a lot of good places to go and get stuff to go to the movies.
Oh,
They-
yes.
I think the Indiana and the Harris Grand both had popcorn machines. They just doused in butter. I remember that. But Tommy Kanakis,
Yeah,
when he
I
was
remember.
younger, he had a crush on me for some reason, and he brought me a box of homemade candy.
Mm.
Boy, I thought I was 17.
Yes.
They had caramel apples down there by the Indiana Theater on
Yeah,
the stick.
that's the Candy Kitchen.
Yeah.
Now, what's his name? Now, you know who owned that. I just
Nickus.
I can see.
Nickus.
Huh?
Harry Nickus.
Yes.
Nickus.
Yeah, Nickis's.
Bill, how about you?
Well, I remember it very, very well. We had 2 grocery stores within 3 blocks of us. And from my sophomore year through my senior year of school, I worked at one of them after school and on weekends. And it's too bad that those stores are gone.
Yeah.
Because I remember the store where I was employed. I was the only employee except for the family that owned it. It was the Hill family. Zeke Hill and his son Ray owned the
I
store.
remember that.
And Liz's grandfather's business, the Hal Candy Company, sold product to us at that store. I remember that. And however, when the first Kroger supermarket came to town, after A&P had already been here for a few years, that was the death of the neighborhood groceries.
Wasn't Kroger's downtown at that time?
Yeah,
when they
Mhm,
came
they were.
down the-
Right by Woolworths, wasn't it, next to
Right
the
by
corner there,
Woolworths.
by the Grand Hotel.
And then the supermarket came down on South College.
Yeah,
Yeah.
A&P was in.
Oh, if they ever get that supermarket finished down south.
I remember when I was, well, I know you think it's funny, I remember that far back, but I do. I was 2 years old when we came back to Bloomington, and we lived in the old Feldes home across from the Kleindorfer's Grocery on East 2nd Street. They made it into a duplex now, but that was built with my mother being a little girl. I went across the street one day by myself. I may have turned 3, I may have been that old. But I went by myself across the street. Of course, anybody panic nowadays, but there wasn't anything going by much. And I went into the grocery, And at that time, people would charge, they'd call in their groceries. Mother always called her groceries in, and, you know, they'd bring your groceries to you, and then at the end of the week, you'd pay their bill, yeah. So I went in there and I said, I want a penny's worth of marshmallows. And do you know that when that bill came out Saturday, that was on there? Mother said, of all things, it said marshmallows, 1 cent. And she just never quite got over that.
Just while we're on the subject of edibles, there's one related subject I want to bring up. We had the most delightful donut shop in this town, long before Krispy Kreme
yes.
became known as
On 7th Street.
a corporate donut supplier. We had the Krispy Kreme donut shop. They were first located at the corner of 15th and North Walnut Streets. Then they moved to 7th Street, just off of College, where the Justice Building is now located. But if you timed it right and you got there when the donuts were good and hot, you couldn't beat that. I remember in high school, instead of drinking beer, we'd have a party after the football game. We'd buy a dozen hot donuts and pour a cider and go to a friend's house, and that's how we enjoyed our evening.
Those were
Oh, they were.
delicious. They were
I
really
bet I could eat a dozen of them right now.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd take
now I'll
one.
tell you, they do the Krispy Kreme when you get them coming off. When we were in Florida, we could go where they made the Krispy Kreme, and they say just like that.
Did they?
Just
Oh, they're
like
good.
that. Don would go down there in Fort Lauderdale, make a trip is about a half hour from where we live. He'd go down and get a dozen of those Krispy Kremes from people in our neighbors in the condo. They just loved them. I said, oh, boy, do they put the weight on. Ooh.
Yes. Are there any other subjects that you would like to talk a little bit about?
Well,
Oh, I could talk
Something
all
you
day, but
remember?
you wouldn't want to hear me.
We'll
But,
give you a little time.
Could I ask if you have more stories about the various parks and the recreation in the parks and those kinds of things?
well.
Cascades.
Yeah, the Cascades was the place to go for picnics.
Mhm.
And they had a shelter house, and you had to get out there early to get it.
You had a pool.
And they had a pool out there, and I loved the swimming pool
Mhm.
out there. I hated it when they closed it because.
Oh, I did too.
Yeah.
They should have kept that out there.
Well, they couldn't afford to fix it, so it was working.
Yeah, I know.
It wasn't
Oh,
winter
it was-
sanitary.
it was great.
But no, we really liked, but I swam more in the quarry holes than I did in the pools.
I never was a good swimmer, and I'm still
Oh,
not.
I've always been a good swimmer. And,
My kids are, but-
Dick and Mabel, my brother and his wife, and her brothers, Fat, we'd go out west of town, and I'd go with them. I wasn't very old. Dick's 8 years older than I am, or 9 older than I am, so I wasn't very old. And I'd dive. No, I didn't jump. I dived off those highest cliffs into the deep part.
As I recall, at that time, I think Cascades Park was our park system.
Yeah.
I believe that was the
Basically,
only
that
one.
was it.
And
Well-
we did enjoy going to McCormick's Creek and
Oh,
Brown
yeah.
Brown
Brown County,
County.
yeah.
And didn't we at that time though have the 3rd Street Park with
Oh,
the band
yes,
show?
yes.
Because
Yeah, we had
every
a band
Thursday
show.
night was a band concert.
Yeah, we had a band
And-
concert.
And we would walk clear out from the end of East First Street to the 3rd Street Park and go to the band concert.
And then walk
I'd
home.
pick up my friends on the way, Mary Lou and the rest of us, and we'd go and drop them off on the way home. Nobody was worried about us. Wouldn't that be neat? I mean, kids miss something, that freedom.
Well, I wouldn't think about going swimming now because I'd have to do my hair. But back then, I'm sure, now you may remember this, but I had kind of long hair, as you can see, and I swam a lot. And you remember when we wore snoods?
Yes. Things that went around our heads and held our hair.
Anything to do with your hair.
I never had one.
I washed my hair in the cold water after I got out of the pool, and my hair would be soaking wet, and you had to put something on, so I'd put on that snood and tie it over.
I never had hair. You were lucky. I never have had any more than
Well,
I
you
got
can see,
now.
I had
Kept it
quite a
off.
bit. But anyway, I just looked awful. Don and I started going together about that time. He got used to it.
I guess so.
I'd like to comment, Liz, on the war years here in Bloomington,
Okay, yeah.
just briefly. During the war years, Indiana University was used as a training area for several of the services. I remember the Navy was here and the Army, and they had a training area for the waves because they used to do their marching in our neighborhood. And so we were exposed to that, and of course the war years were, I was quite young at that time, and I remember following it by radio. Of course we didn't have television. The march all the way through Europe and then Japan. And I remember the night that the war ended, the war in Japan, which ended the war. It rained and rained. You remember that? It
Yeah,
rained.
it
and
rained.
We had more
We
rain
went
that
to
night.
town,
than-
took our shoes off and waded uptown.
That's right.
Yeah,
Everybody
yeah.
was out in the
We went
streets.
anyway.
I'm glad you commented on that because that Navy was stationed here, he saved my nephew's life. It did save his life because my brother Paul was in service and he was a pilot. He had dropped out of college in his senior year to go to join the Air Force. And they had, had married Doris Waring. That was her second marriage. It was Doris Prince when he married her. And they had a son, and Scott just weighed about 5.5 pounds when he was born. And he was born with this overdeveloped muscle in his, and they didn't know what to do with it. And a Navy doctor, they didn't have anyone in Bloomington that could operate for that. And they went there and they found a Navy doctor who would do the surgery. And that was the last time Paul saw him. He got to come home for that surgery before he went overseas. And Scott was operated and he recovered. He's a fine young old man now, but Paul was lost in service. So he only got to see him that one time. We were thankful that the Navy was here because that doctor saved Scott's life.
Yes, that would be
It's
very memorable
it's something
thing.
you would
Yes.
never forget.
Yes,
Never
that's
forget
right.
it.
What about the skinned knees? And speaking of hospitals,
Oh.
I don't suppose you ever went to the hospital as a kid unless you had a really
Yes,
serious
I
accident.
certainly did. I had my tonsils taken out.
My tonsils, that's the only time I ever went.
And the thing was,
Yeah.
my brother Jim, and I was 3 years younger, and then Tommy Owens, my cousin, we all had our tonsils taken out the same day. I think Dr. Moser did all of them. But even no matter how they did it, they were going to get me.
Dr. Reed did mine.
Well, Dr. Moser did ours,
Bill Reed-
all
Bill
three of
Reed's
the
dad.
same day. But I dreaded that, and I had such a sore throat, I remember that. But the thing I remember most about the hospital, the old hospital, is after Steve was born, he was about 2 years old, he fell. And he actually had a fractured leg, but we didn't know at the time. We took him to the hospital to find out what was wrong. And do you remember the supervisor over there? She was the meanest old woman.
Oh, yeah. No.
Anyway,
Uh-uh.
what is that child doing in the waiting room?
Yeah.
And I said, we
That's
think
who
he
she
has a
was.
broken leg. You know, it's the best. She was so hateful. But you didn't have any, you couldn't ever bring a kid in there unless there was a reason for it. But that was just the old part of the hospital.
Yeah.
Bill, did you ever go to the hospital?
No, no.
Good.
I had a badly sprained wrist where I cried all night, but I didn't go to the hospital. I just went to the doctor, and he had this gadget in his office where I stuck my wrist in there, and he could see through, sort of like X-ray.
Oh.
Determined that there were no broken bones, so he wrapped it up.
Remember when we used to go to the shoe store and they
Put your foot up
Put your
there.
foot in there.
See if your shoe was long enough or not.
This was similar to that.
Yeah.
We used to
Forgot
go
about that, but it was
to,
a form of X-ray.
Yeah.
It really was.
we used to go to the show, Mary Lou, and I talk about Mary Lou so much, but she was my friend, and the mothers were friends, and our grandmas and all the way through. Anyway, we'd go to the show on Saturday morning, and we'd take our lunch. I mean, can you imagine this? And we'd go to Harris Grand.
All
Because-
those cereals.
Yeah, because see, if you, in the morning, you'd get certain shows and stuff, but you eat your lunch, and then in the afternoon, they had a film, I mean, you know, a regular length movie. And we do all that when we and we walked down from home. And we got done, and, well, we got in free because Uncle Roy and Uncle Rob Harris owned the Harris Grand Princess. And so we'd get in free. So then we got out of the show, we walked over to Stout's Drugstore, and that's the one her folks had.
Yeah.
And so we could sit down in there and get anything we wanted to eat. So we do that. No wonder I've got this middle. And
They had the best hot fudge sundaes.
they did, and chocolate soda, the first one I ever
The
tasted
hot
there.
fudge came in a little cup.
And then
about
we'd
that
walk
big.
home, and that was our big Saturday.
Well, my dad used to, my cousins that lived up the street, they were even poorer than we were. But my dad always managed to find a quarter for everybody on Saturday morning. And they would come down, see Uncle Willie, and get their quarter, and we'd all go to the Harris Grand, and you had, your admission, I think, might have been a dime.
Dime, yeah.
And then you had 15 cents left over for whatever. That was a big
Big
deal.
treat, yes.
Yeah.
I remember the night that the Harris Grand Theater burned.
Oh, I do too.
It was a very bad fire, and
Yeah.
a difficult fire to control. Arthur Day was my uncle who owned the funeral home.
Right beside it,
It was
yeah.
right beside it, and our family was quite worried because the fire department was pouring water on the roof of the funeral home because the wind was from the south and blowing everything over there. But I think that's the biggest fire I ever
I brought a picture of that out of the newspaper down to here recently. Somebody's got
We
it.
have-
You got it,
We
yeah.
have pictures in.
I kept it in my scrapbook. I kept everything in it. But we went to that fire, you can bet.
And then when Bloomington High School burned, you probably were there.
We
to
were there,
watch
oh,
that.
absolutely. I had Jim in a stroller.
Well, that just broke my dad's heart. He
Yeah.
hauled all the brick for that.
Yeah, I hated
Yeah,
that.
my grandfather owned well, I've told you this, owned a dray service. And their farm is where Bloomington Hospital is now. That whole area was his farm. And he had horses and all that sort of thing, and people that worked for him out there. But my dad, when Mom and Dad were first married, worked for his dad, and he hauled all the brick. And my brother Harold used to ride with him on the thing. He acted like he was helping. But they hauled all the brick to build Bloomington Hospital, or Bloomington High School. Yeah, so when that burned, that really
Yeah.
upset my dad.
Yes, it would.
Well, Liz has a brick from
Oh,
the
does
old
she have
Bloomington
a
High
brick?
School.
I
yeah.
had a chair.
We've got
too.
one.
Now my son, one of my sons has.
Well, we've got it. I don't know who's got it. It's probably still there. Everything else is.
Well, anyway, that brick was probably hauled by my father.
And you know, it's interesting. It's a kind of a little interesting tidbit at this point, but it's not too connected, but sort of. I guess you've all realized that the building next to that first Bloomington High School there,
Oh,
we call it a seminary.
Yeah, the
Okay,
seminary building.
that was the old IU,
Yeah, I know.
and it had a top floor that had the stone
Mhm.
I have pictures of them.
things of the door. Yeah, I brought some of them in too. Anyway, they took that top layer off and they took these out to the campus and made the well house.
Yeah.
That's what it's made out of. And I think that's kind of interesting. And they were the Gothic architecture, and that's where we got our Gothic name.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
found
my mother used to walk to school from where Mom and Dad, where they lived, out on the corner of Whitehall Pike and Corey Lane. That
Mhm.
house was just torn down recently. And she and Grandpa used to walk into town together. She'd go to school and he'd go to work. And by the time, Mom said in the wintertime, by the time they got in town, Grandpa's whiskers were white with icy snow. And she said, no wonder I had bad feet. Walking all that way. And
Yeah.
where she went to school was the old seminary building.
and we use it for band, choir,
Oh, yeah.
home
yeah.
ec, art, and something
Yeah, I was
else.
in Glee Club. I was in there a lot.
Yeah, I was too. We were in chorus together, Jane and I.
Bill, do you have any other stories you'd like to tell us about?
Got a lot of stories I could tell, but I dare not share them with you.
Well, we all have those.
We all got it.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for being here today and telling us about your memories. our time is just about up, but you can come in anytime and tell us here at the History Center about your memories. Bring pictures or that type of thing.
Are
I'll
you
bring
gonna
you
tell
my
us about the books?
candlesticks.
These are yearbooks that from Bloomington High School and some from U School. And these are the 1987 Family Heritage book that tells about different families. And this is the 2007 Family Heritage book for those that didn't get in the first one. So those
And that's
are-
our senior yearbook right
Yeah.
there. And then I was at university school 2 years.
So I had this.
Because they drew the line right down the middle of the road, and we went to university, and they went to BHS. But I had gone so long at BHS that I wanted to graduate there. So after 2 years at university, I went back and graduated at BHS.
I
Well,
never, I
you
never
know,
left.
Hmm?
I never left.
Well, thank you.